So my enthusiasm is now solely directed to Dr. Anthony Rostain, who I personally value as an expert colleague. I am both pleased and excited to introduce him. Dr. Rostain is chair and professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at Cooper Medical School of Rowan University, and is emeritus professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania's Perelman School of Medicine. He's chief of psychiatry and behavioral health at Cooper University Healthcare, where he directs the clinical, education, and research activities of the department. He is also medical director of the Penn Adult ADHD Treatment and Research Program. His clinical focus is lifespan neurodevelopmental psychiatry. His research interests focus on improving clinical outcomes for patients across the lifespan and on creating effective service systems for these patients and their families. He is also co-author with Dr. Hibbs of this text, The Stressed Years of Their Lives, Helping Your Kids Survive and Thrive During Their College Years. Just a bit, I'll end with a little bit about the book. After watching her own college student struggle with mental health, Dr. Hibbs worked with Dr. Rostain to help her son. Then she and Dr. Rostain wrote the text, a guide for parents of college students who want to help support their kids' mental health. I have often recommended without hesitation the co-authored book. The feedback I receive gets many, many stars. It is an engaging book that offers practical and useful guidance as well as the author's combined academic knowledge. So I am now excited to turn the program over to Dr. Rostain.
And to have all of you join this evening, I really appreciate you taking time from your lives to listen and to share your thoughts about the material I'm going to share. I want to just start sharing my screen and start off by saying that Dr. Hibbs has a son named in the book Jensen, who I had the good fortune to take care of when he couldn't really make it through his freshman year of college. And I knew Dr. Hibbs professionally. We had shared many patients together over the years. But she called me up one day and said she was worried about Jensen. And she said, would you be so kind as to help us out? And I took on the project and worked very closely and intensively with him and with the family. And over several years, he got better. So the story got really a happy ending. He is actually doing extremely well right now. Jensen is recently married about a year ago and is a successful, working successfully in the field of ultrasound technology. But Jensen grew up with a lot of anxiety, and he was definitely neuroatypical. Later to be, learned that he was on the autism spectrum. And as a young man, he had many challenges, some of which Dr. Hibbs would be more than happy to share, but it's written about in the book. You will certainly could, if you want to, learn more about Jensen. She did want to say that for her growing up, and for him especially, being able to develop confidence and abilities, moving out from home into first day camp and then eventually into overnight camp was really phenomenal for him. The family has a place up in Maine, and Jensen would take off for a week and go canoeing or kayaking in the outdoors, and she said it was a profoundly transformative experience for him. So, I'm really thrilled that you were all involved in camping and in bringing children and young people to the outdoors. And I hope my comments tonight stimulate some discussion later about how do we help kids get ready, for transitions, for changes, whether it be camp or school or life. And now I'm going to have to make sure I know how to advance this properly. So how did we get here into even having to talk about the difficulties that kids have with leaving home? this is not new, but we noticed in the last couple of decades a greater set of challenges facing kids and parents as they were getting ready to move on to college. And this transition to adult independence has become markedly more difficult, we think, over the last several decades because of larger global changes, global economy, climate change and the threat of climate change. A number of historical events have really fostered a greater sense of fragility, vulnerability in young people and in the families they come from. So, as I mentioned, Bea was originally going to write the book on her own and have it be about Jensen's story. But her book agent said, you ought to get this guy Rostain involved because maybe you could write something a bit broader than just one story and one, powerful narrative, and maybe think about all of the different young people who are having trouble moving on. And as you heard from Myrna, I've pretty much spent my entire career working with young people who are in some ways differently abled than their peers. And in being differently abled, they often don't see their abilities, they just see their difficulties. And so part of the trick is to help people see themselves differently through fostering experiences that promote independence and resilience. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about here. The real question is Max ready to sail off into, all to go to where the wild things are? And if you know that book, you understand that this is a universal challenge, getting ready. And how do you know your child is ready? And, in what ways can you help them get ready if they don't appear to be ready? This is really how we came to write the book. And interestingly, even though it does focus on preparing kids for college, Bea and I recognize that actually this starts many, many years before. It starts early in life. And college is obviously one of the biggest leaps. But arriving there requires having navigated lots of transitions and lots of steps before. So, I was talking with the board right before we started this meeting about the importance of summer camps. And I was reflecting on my own experiences in summer camp and my kids who went to summer camp. There's no question that summer camps are hugely important, both for kids, because for them it helps them to explore new places and to learn about nature, to meet new people, to learn new skills, and to practice being independent. And obviously, that's not a given that kids just show up and do all this. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of thoughtful programming and constant monitoring and figuring things out on the part of camp staff. But really, it's a remarkable opportunity for kids to get away from their parents and to figure out who they are and how to enjoy themselves in a different environment. I will also add one important, and this became more and more clear, but an important change, as you all know, in our world has been the growing dependence that we all have on virtual reality and virtual communication and on screens and on the sort of digital media that allow us to sort of learn now and talk and do business, etc. But that pulls us farther and farther away from nature to the point where people have been writing about nature deficit disorder as a concern for young people in this world. And of course, the pandemic has made it even more the case that we're all spending so much more time on screens that, I've begun to be very interested in this topic. I've just recently gave a grand rounds at Duke University on the effects of the digital age on the mental health of all of us, but in particularly on the mental health of people with vulnerabilities, such as the young people that I work with. So camp breaks that lock hold of sort of screen time and just gets you back into your body and into the world around you. And that's a phenomenal treasure. In fact, I think I remember hearing a story about 4 or 5 years ago about how for some kids it was the first time they had to learn to get away from their own cell phones that they had become addicted to. So it was really an interesting story. Like one kid said, wow, I even discovered that it's like a lot of fun to just be in the woods or read or do things without this screen in front of me. So I just say for kids, even more than ever, camp is an important place to learn about life and about being in the world. And then for parents, it's not only a way to help parents sort of be able to, feel less anxious, that they don't have to be constantly concerned is my kid going to be okay without me. It's a great place to practice launching. And at the same time, it also gives them a break from having to be actively involved, in a day-to-day way in their child's life. I'm going to try and switch to the screen. Okay. So one of our big messages in the book is about resiliency. What is it? How do people achieve it? Resiliency is the ability to recover strength, spirits, good humor relatively quickly, or another word for it is buoyancy, being able to bounce back. And resiliency helps us helps us to tolerate the negative impact of disappointments and setbacks and all the curveballs that we have to deal with as life brings us all kinds of unexpected situations. But remember, resiliency is not just a feature of an individual. It's actually embedded in a social context. In particular, our families, our schools, colleges, when kids go off to college. The environment itself either promotes or makes more difficult the whole notion of adaptation or resiliency. And so I think that one of the things that's important about Camp Launcher and the camps that you all are involved in is that you're creating an environment that contextually supports resilience. That's your goal. And so that I think is really important and remarkable. And the other thing is that, learning from mistakes, like being able to fall down and get up and go, ta-da, and not fall apart is really a key component. And one of the recurring themes in our book is that mistakes are inevitable. We just have to make them learning opportunities rather than sources of fear, shame, or a sense of life being over because you blew it. So going back to this unique moment, though, that we're in historically, over the decades, since the founding of our country, parenting and the view of what was important always would vary between times when autonomy was really promoted and times when parental control was really more important. In more permissive eras of prosperity and in eras of prosperity and stability, parenting was more permissive. I grew up in the time post-war, the United States. We were flourishing, most of us, not all of us, but at least there was a growth in the sense of the United States as a stable economic power. And we'd have to tell our parents, well, we're going to the park. And I grew up in New York. I go to the park. I'll be home by dinner. And no way was my whereabouts being tracked with any GPS device or anything else. I just went to the park, and that was that. And so did every other kid. So, my parents were just doing what every other parent did. Nowadays, same park, west side of New York, it's a totally different scene. Kids are not just roaming around. Parents are nearby or somebody's watching them because we're living in a time of greater economic hardship and change and uncertainty. And so I think that it's very hard right now for kids and parents to find, that proper balance between protectiveness and permissiveness. And I'm really here to say that, it's not that you should be completely permissive, but learning to be more so in this era of overprotection is an important goal for parents. Now, I think how you do this requires that you need to understand some basic principles of child and adolescent development and techniques to promote social emotional readiness. I've been really big on this issue of executive functioning skills, although those are not so easy to teach, but you have to practice them. And we think all parents need to understand about family mental health and gain a language for talking about problems that may emerge or do have emerged in your family. And then, of course, practicing stress management and learning from mistakes. So I've already mentioned that before. So how do we do that? How do we promote these transitions? Well, I'm going to go through this quickly because I really want to kind of talk about social and emotional development. But having a sense of one's identity isn't something that emerges spontaneously. This is the task of middle childhood and of adolescence. Going through this time period is very complicated, and I won't go through each of these hexagons here. You can see them for yourselves. This is a tremendously complicated process. And if you're someone who's differently abled or on the spectrum, it's even more complicated because, it's hard to have references from your peers. You kind of may not be in sync with the way others are going about this process. The other thing is that, parents' role have to change in middle school. The school begins to expect that kids do on their own things like keep track of time and take on greater self-control and participate in groups and develop themselves, okay? Meanwhile, parents have to step back and become more of a coach rather than a supervisor. And that's not easy to do, especially when kids have difficulties with managing things on their own. So talking about self-control, talking about not doing everything, letting go of that micromanaging, and simply being more of a monitor rather than a director is, we think, the biggest challenge for late middle school and early high school for all of you as parents. And again, what do most young people want? They want to figure out who they are. Who am I? Which of these roles will I assume? And they want to be able to feel like they have friends. And those two goals, figuring out who I am and figuring out how to have friends, believe me, that's not over by the time you're done with adolescence. But it is keenly the most important goal for young people at that stage. In fact, they are exquisitely sensitive to rejection, exquisitely sensitive to reinforcement and seeking peer acknowledgement, and they are extremely vulnerable when, in fact, they are not feeling like they are fitting in. So this is something that I think the camps that Camp Launcher is sponsoring are particularly helpful for, because it's very hard to do this in the context of school, since school is a very, very elaborate social setting and all kinds of other agendas going on at school. And even in after school, it's a short period of time, and it's really not as easy to do what you can accomplish in camp with all of the time being devoted to being together with others is really a unique place for fostering adolescent development. Now, I was talking about maybe the most important core part of the first half of our book. The first half of our book is about preparation. The second half is about what happens if things go wrong. We're not going to focus on that tonight. But the key components of social emotional readiness that I'm going to review for you are listed here, and I'll go through them and spend a moment with each to describe what we mean by that. First comes, and the other thing to say is that when you have social emotional readiness and you're able to practice and get better at dealing with stress, you begin to feel better about yourself. You have greater insight into personal relationships, being able to realistically evaluate others. You become attentive and open to experience more flexible, and better able to integrate thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So to my way of thinking, experiences that promote social emotional skills and resilience and coping skills really do promote the goals that we all want for our young people, which is to become happy and well-functioning people. With whatever their endowment, with whatever their particular interests are, that they should be able to navigate this complicated world. Okay, so social emotional readiness skill number 1 is conscientiousness. And this is just what it means, just owning one's actions, saying what you mean, doing what you say, owning up to your mistakes. Easier said than done, as we know from some major political figures and not too long ago, or still around the scene. People have to take ownership. Lots of people don't. Being able to be reliable, predictable, trustworthy, being able to know what areas you have to have responsibility for and accountability for. And once again, this has to be developmentally appropriate, okay? A middle schooler has one set of chores they may have to do. When you're in high school, there may be other chores you've got to be expected to do. But without having clear expectations, then it's hard to develop this sense of owning one's actions. And if we over-scaffold kids, they don't learn that they have to become ready on their own to own their actions. The next is self-management. And this is basically doing your day-to-day activities on your own. Getting up, getting ready for the day, going through a routine, and being able to fall asleep at a regular time. Now, a lot of this is very clearly orchestrated, but one of the things we encourage is for parents to do less and less of the things like waking the kid up or, monitoring every step they take, because that will allow, again, greater self-management to be achieved. Interpersonal skills, this is probably one of the most important domains for lifelong success, and especially with kids on the spectrum, this has to be a very major area for conversation, for demonstration, and for supervising, especially in the camp situation, helping the conflicts get managed appropriately. And for parents, really being able to take an inventory of where your young person is in these social skill areas, and also monitoring very carefully who they're hanging out with when they're going online. And I'm sort of become more and more concerned that the attitude of young people towards their parents knowing about this, like it's none of their business, has to really be clarified. The devices need to be viewed as not owned by the kid, but leased by the kid. And that, if they violate certain rules, like go to places they shouldn't go, that's got to be, an explicit discussion. But more important than ever is knowing who your child is hanging out with, because we know that cyberbullying is real and that kids suffer from that. We also know that there are people taking advantage of young people, collecting private information. So all of this interpersonal skills as applied to the internet could be a whole topic for an evening. We could talk about that easily for an hour. Now, self-control is the ability to set limits and resist our urges and desires. And by the way, this is not mastered by the end of adolescence. I mean, we are still, all of us throughout life, trying to figure out how to set limits on our desires. But you may recall the marshmallow test, where 4-year-olds were given a marshmallow and told, if you don't eat this till I come back, you'll get a second marshmallow. And how kids were able to, or not, hold on for the 20 minutes it took for the adult to come back is the subject of really interesting study. There are now some great videos of this that you can see on YouTube, because how kids manage to keep themselves from eating the marshmallows. It's really interesting to see kids having all these strategies, right? But the kids who could hold off for 20 minutes, years later, were the ones that were able to actually take better charge of their lives and had more successful academics and a greater ability to manage themselves. Whereas those that were unable to do so at age 4, they had a little more difficulty. So right now, what does it mean? Well, you've got to give young people graded practical experiences in exercising their autonomy. How much time can they limit themselves or not on social media? Can they maintain healthy eating habits? Can they maintain a healthy sleep-wake cycle? And once again, we don't expect this to happen, all at once. Practice makes perfect. Then there's grit, which is the ability to cope with frustration and disappointment and setbacks. And, this notion that being able to persist despite failure or despite not achieving one's goals is a key component of resilience. And this can be learned, especially if the young person is given the explicit instruction that we don't expect you to get this right the first time. That part of the challenge here is learning how to deal with the disappointment or the frustration that you're not going to get it right, as opposed to telling everybody, well, go ahead and figure it out. This is like, we're going to challenge you to see if you can manage to put up with the fact that this obstacle, and, in fact, when you think about it, grit, you can see grit in different areas in different ways. So in your area of greatest competency, you tend to demonstrate the greatest grit. And I've seen I've seen young people who had tremendous difficulty with maintaining grit when it came to learning certain things academically. But when I heard about how they would spend hours playing a video game that really was throwing obstacle after obstacle, and they'd have to start over again, there they were able to show grit. So it's interesting. Grit is not uniformly applied. You've got more grit in the areas that you feel more confident in. And this, again, learning distress tolerance, what I said before, can be taught. This is just an interesting summary of research. Angela Duckworth at Penn coined the term grit, and a wonderful review of some of that research in Paul Tufts' book, How Children Succeed. It really turns out that it is sticking with things over the long term until you master them that is one of the predictors of life success. So then there's risk management, and that's just being able to have fun without experimenting in dangerous ways with fun. There's self-acceptance, which is a really big challenge for many, especially many people on the spectrum, because they often feel very, very much like there's something wrong with them. But the ability to accept one's faults and tolerate one's mistakes without excessive guilt or shame, I think, is a hugely important capacity. And when it isn't there, we see things like destructive perfectionism, and which is linked often to the myth of infinite perfectibility. And this we saw a lot at Penn when I was co-chair of a task force on student psychological health and welfare, which really was put together in the aftermath of some very unfortunate suicides, among some very publicized suicides. And the question had been raised, like, what's going on here? Why are so many young people giving up? And it turned out that part of the problem was this failure to accept one's faults and what we termed destructive perfectionism, seeing one's faults to such a degree as incompatible with life. So the answer to that is self-compassion. And once again, this takes tremendous amount of practice, but we now know from the work of people like Christina Neff that self-compassion probably has one of the most important benefits to be had from self-compassion is the ability to withstand one's failures and to be able to feel good about oneself, even if one isn't necessarily being perfect or being accepted by everybody around you. So self-compassion is something I've come to appreciate is a goal of the work I do in therapy with my patients. And finally, being able to be open enough to seek help and be ready to acknowledge when things aren't going well, and overcoming denial or somehow that, there's something wrong with getting help from people. Just to return then to Dr. Hibbs's experience with Jensen, we're not going to be able to show a video that we were going to, but one of the things he comments on was his childhood was, I read books and I got bullied. And it did take him a while until he was able to find the right school and to be able to really enjoy who he was. Like, for example, one important move that Jensen's family made was to move him to a smaller school that was really filled with all kinds of diversity in kids. And there he was able to feel less picked on. He was actually not bullied. They didn't let kids bully each other there. But also he didn't feel so different. He fit in with all of the different people who were differently abled, like him. And what happened was he was able to do things like go rock climbing on a rock wall at school, and eventually they took the kids on a trip to West Virginia, and he was able to climb Seneca, and I mean, just incredible. And she likes to say that he came back from that trip with a T-shirt that said, "If you die, we'll split your gear." And it's the kind of humor that Jensen had that was one of his most compellingly positive attributes. But this idea that you've got to get out of the situations that are not good for you and find healthier ones. And so finally, this happens, of course, because of all of you. You as families are important in the lives of your kids. And what we really wanted to, I will end with, is this idea that both parents and kids have mindset barriers. And it's important to know those barriers, because challenging these mindset barriers is vital for kids to be able to overcome their anxiety and their fear of transition. So for people that I'm describing to you, and you probably know, the fear of social rejection, this fear of not making it that leads to perfectionism, the fear of disappointing parents, and the fear of being different, especially having mental health issues. All of these things have to be taken on and tackled straight on, and pointed out, like you're having this bias, that you're afraid of all of these things. So let's talk about how to help you overcome your fears. Parents have their own mindset barriers, wanting to, keep up with the Joneses, or wanting their kid to get into some brand name school, or wishing they had a perfect child and seeing that they don't. All of these are barriers that can be overcome with, I think, thoughtful reflection and conversation. And that's really what we invite everyone we speak to ask us about and talk about. And finally, educators themselves have a lot of mindset barriers, which I don't have time to go into, but it's not, these are unconscious biases many of the time, and they're implicit assumptions people make about what they're supposed to be doing. And we encourage all of you to really reevaluate those assumptions and try to see if you can get out of that kind of one-dimensional thinking. So with that, I'm going to say, I think I've used up my time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any of you that have questions or want to engage in a conversation.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rostain. We'll turn it over to Eric, who has been moderating the chat feature. But I just want to thank you for really bridging the divide between the abstract and the concrete. Those of us who work in the camp world, we're preaching this, and you've really brought such a wonderful, clear clinical perspective. I wrote down a couple of things you said, graded practical experiences to practice autonomy. And I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, that it seems like what you're describing is experiential learning.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Excellent. Great.
It's not a spectator sport. It's not we have to just get in there and live and then learn as we do.
Excellent, thank you. So I'll turn it over to Eric for questions. And as a reminder that the context for tonight is the organization that I'm here to represent, as well as our other board members. We are Camp Launcher, and our role is to provide scholarships for neurodiverse individuals to attend programs that can give them the type of opportunities that Dr. Rostain is describing. So we'll also provide more information tonight if you are hoping to get involved as a recipient, if you're looking to see our partner camps and understand environments that are working to build this cohort model that Dr. Rostain has mentioned about being around other kids who are thinking in these differently, uniquely wired ways. And additionally, if you have opportunities that you could help us provide further scholarships, we would love to have further conversations with you. But in general, the goal of tonight is just to take more steps to building this community of Camp Launcher to be sharing resources and experiences. So Eric, I'll turn it over to you for the opportunity to ask some direct questions and answers.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Dr. Rostain. I am also struck, as Elise was, by two things going on simultaneously in my mind. One is like I'm patting myself on the back. I'm so proud to be a summer camp director that does this kind of work for neurodiverse kids. And at the same time, I'm making all these notes because as a parent, there's so many things I have to do more and differently and better. So I'm in both roles in this case. But we have some questions from folks who are listening out there. So I will put those to you. And right now we have only 5 or 6 or so. We can take some time to answer each of these, I think. We have one question from a parent whose son is attending college in the fall, and he's doing fine academically, but has limited experiences being away from home. And this person is going to read your book, but for now, curious if you have any just sort of like top hit suggestions for preparing him for this important transition away from home. It sounds like maybe it's too late to send him to camp, but what else can you recommend?
Well, look, first of all, congratulations on getting ready to launch your child to college. It's a great thing, a great achievement, okay? I do think that it's not too late to practice sort of taking charge of your life. So one important set of questions would be, while your child is still at home, is to make sure that he's practicing the self-management skills I described. Because getting up for, and I like to tell this story because, being at Penn for all those years and running this ADD program, I remember it must have been about a decade ago, I got a call in August from a parent that said, "Is this Dr. Rostain who runs the ADD program?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, my son is about to start at Penn, and he has ADHD." I said, "Well, it's a great place. There's the Weingarten Center and all these other things to help people with ADHD." She goes, "Yeah, but I want to know something. Does your program have a wake-up service?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And she goes, "Well, my son can't get himself up in the morning. I have to get him up in the morning, and I think he needs a wake-up service." And I said, "Well, unfortunately, we don't have a wake-up service, and unless you're planning to come here with him to wake him up, you're going to have to get him to practice that skill really, really hard in the few weeks before he comes." So that's an example of a self-management skill that you got to make sure you pull back. Your kid has to get up on their own, has to maybe learn how to, certainly learn how to do their own laundry, how to get to bed, and lately thinking about also how are they going to manage their technology. I think this is a huge challenge for young people now. How are they going to monitor their time? And then if there's a way for this young person to go away, there are some summer experiences before college. I would urge you to look into some of those because pre-college on-campus experiences are really good. In fact, I now mention to all of my patients that if you want to see how your kid's going to do, they're going to move away from summer camp, but go to the camp at the college, meaning spend a couple of weeks managing on their own and seeing what happens. There's nothing like experience to prepare you, as Elise said, And then finally, I would say that if before your young person goes off to school, to make sure that they know what they're going to need in the way of support help for not necessarily academics, but for the other aspects of their life that they may have trouble with. especially with social life and making sure that they have prepared ahead of time for maybe what clubs they want to join. Bea and I talk a lot about the fact that the most important thing for young people about college is not what they take in academically. It's who they're meeting and who they're hanging with, and making sure that there's a little bit of an easing into this environment by looking at who might they already know, who's there, what kinds of clubs do they like, and get, again, like I'll tell you, a great club at Penn and other places like rock climbing and going out and into nature with other people. Maybe I'm on the camping theme here, but whatever your young person enjoys doing, making sure they reach out before they go.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to jump off kind of on a related topic. We have a family on the call who typically takes their phone away from their son at the end of every day. COVID has thrown a lot of things for a loop for all of us, and it was a very tough week for him, and so they let him have his phone one night. He stayed up all night playing video games in his room and was sleep deprived the next day, and clearly this family has said, we get it, self-control is an issue here. And they're curious, when we have moments like that, when we've maybe fallen down, how do we make that a teachable moment for the child, maybe for the parents too? How would you repair that situation?
Well, look, it comes first with a conversation, right? Which is, let's be honest here. What happened? What do you make of it? How will you plan to prevent this from happening again? Now, if the young person thinks, no, that was the greatest thing of all, I had the best time, and who the hell cares if I blew it the next day, then, Houston, we have a problem, because then that means that person isn't showing conscientiousness or they're minimizing. It's funny, I have another co-author in my ADD book, Dr. Ramsey, and he and I talk a lot about the problem with positive thinking. And here's the problem with positive thinking. You do something like stay up all night, and you end up thinking, that was great. That was not such a big deal. You're sort of having a bias that minimizes the risk. So I would say first, acknowledge this was something that we let you do, and then you seem to have blown it. So from our point of view, you didn't exercise any self-restraint. Was that your intention? Did you mean to stay up all night, or did it just happen? And I would really try to learn as much as possible about all the different things that were fueling this foray. And was it a binge because he felt deprived for this long and he was making up for lost time? The next question to follow up with is, so how would you convince us that you're ready to get this back into your own hands? Because we want you to learn to manage this. But you clearly showed us that this was hard. What was hard about it? And then the third thing would be into problem solving, would be, how do you set limits on your usage? And by the way, I am the last one to say I have an answer to that, because I know that I'm tempted sometimes to play words with friends when I should be like shutting down, and we all can get into this. So I'm just thinking this is a good opportunity to have that conversation, rather than just punishing by taking it away, saying, okay, maybe what we need to do is give you leasing it for an hour, and then leasing it for an hour and a half, and then having you develop a routine that lets you set a limit and return it to us. Does that make sense to whoever asked that question? Because if you don't have the conversation, if they're not willing to introspect and see it as a problem, then you're at an earlier stage. They're not at the problem-solving stage. There's a theory there's a whole notion of stages of change. And, like with anybody with an addiction, some people are in total denial. They don't see a problem. Well, if he doesn't see a problem, then what you really need to do is emphasize there's a problem. But if he did see the problem, then you can begin to do a little bit of looking and analyzing, how did it happen?
Tony, I am seeing nods from the question asker, so thank you.
Okay, good.
There, thank you. Another of our listeners is struck by how many different areas there are. You've addressed a lot of different areas of strength and of growth for our kids. Do you know of any I wonder if they wonder if there are any tests or any assessments that you might use to figure out what are your kids' areas of greatest needs.
All right, well, I don't want to pitch my book, but we ask questions around each of those, like assessment questions. There may be there's no simple test that will give you the answer to all the things I asked about, because a lot of it is experiential and observational. But if you ask yourself the question, let's start with conscientiousness. What sorts of things is my child supposed to do for them? What is he accountable for? How much does he do on his own? How much does he need reminding by us to take out, say something simple like take out the garbage, is that their chore, or wash the dishes? A young person who doesn't do the washing the dishes regularly isn't taking ownership. So I would just say in each of those categories, asking yourself the question, how are they demonstrating this set of skills, or where are they deficient? Because again, it's not a universal. They may be very conscientious when it comes to their, something they value, right? They love the cat, they feed the cat, they're really into the cat. But they're not good at taking a shower, or they're not good at going to bed at the right time, or they're not good at when they make a mistake, owning that they make a mistake. So that would just be an area for you to start conversations. And the book doesn't say you have to lecture your child. That doesn't work. This isn't about lecturing. This is about dialogue, engaging in thinking about an area and saying, yeah, you want freedom, but in order to get freedom, you need to show responsibility. And by the way, that's the age-old, youth. And I was a youth one time. We want freedom, but no accountability. That's just the nature of adolescence. And what parents have to do is say, I get it. That's what you want, but that's not the way it's going to work here. You can get more freedom when you show greater accountability and greater conscientiousness. By the way, it's not every human's right to drive a car when they're 16 or 17. That is just not part of the plan that the world expects. So all of these expectations young people have, you have to say, wait a second, these are conditional rights. They are not absolute rights. The right to have your cell phone is conditioned on your proper usage of it. The right to drive a car is conditioned on being able to follow the rules of the road. It's if then, conditional.
Yeah, I'm going to break it just for a moment to say that there are a few questions coming in that are kind of specific to camp. And
good.
I want to say that if
Can you answer some of them?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, exactly.
Yeah, you can answer them. Go ahead.
Is there a camp out there that does X, Y, or Z? Or do you think my child might be right for this kind of camp? Or which of these skills do they need to learn or master at what level before going to a camp? My short answer to that is it depends on the camp. Talk to the camp directors. And I'm happy, my wife and I, who's here in the room with me, are happy to help anybody with any question like that. I will put my email in the chat, and you're more than welcome to reach out to us anytime if it's a camp-specific question. Not that Dr. Rostain doesn't know a lot about camping, but he's here.
But Eric, I'm glad you answered that, because I would have said the same thing, but you as a camp director understand exactly how to answer specifics about your camp. Like, what would my kid be able to do okay in your camp if this is how they are? And I think the same is true of picking a college or picking a high school. It's the same idea, the fit between the kids' abilities and where they need to go. So camp stretches you. You're going to go out of your comfort zone. But, and the important thing is, but let's say, I'm going to give you an example which is not relevant but to you necessarily, but like I wanted to be in a camp with tents, but some kids wanted to be in a cabin. Well, then you don't go to the camp with the tents if you need to be in a cabin. And it's that sort of basic fit between the expectations of the kid and their comfort level. But they do have to be ready to stretch. Like they're going to go to a bathroom that other people use, and that's maybe hard for some kids, etc. They're going to have to eat what's at the dining room. There may be more than one thing they can eat, but they're not, they can have peanut butter and jelly if they don't like the other stuff, but they're not going to be able to just eat, on their own somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to go back to it at the topic that came up earlier, going a little bit older in age and maybe some camp age kids. COVID, again, has turned our world upside down for everybody. And more neurodiverse college-age kids, and even post-grad, after college, kids are coming back home to live with their parents.
Yep.
And they're bringing with them a lot of anxiety, which is adding on to parental anxiety. And I know this is a topic of interest and research for you. With reduced access to outside resources, in particular right now, how can parents manage to keep their sanity given all of this anxiety on top of anxiety?
Oh, wonderful question. Well, I'll give a couple of answers. First of all, there are certain features of this pandemic that are going to be time limited, meaning as we approach something closer to normal, we may never go exactly back to what was, but college right now is definitely not normal for most college students. And coming home being anxious and families being anxious is pretty common, okay? The distress that people are feeling is much, much greater than when Dr. Hibbs and I wrote our book, okay? The rates of anxiety disorders, the rates of depression, we've seen greater consumption of alcohol and substances. So first things first, if you're feeling overly anxious and your kid is too, sit down and talk about it. It's like, okay, we're clearly over anxious here. What can we do to reduce that level of anxiety? And if anxiety is due to the fact that the young person is thinking about something they have no control over, then the first trick of dealing with anxiety is to focus on the things you can control, not on the things you can't. Like, you can wash your hands and you can wear a mask and you can socially distance, but you can't stop the virus from having mutations, because that's going to happen and we're going to have to live with that. And the reality is that trying to change things you can't change worsens one's anxiety. The second is definitely creating a daily structure that includes going outside and being out of that. You don't want to have cabin fever, because when everybody's in the place together and they're all on top of each other, it leads to conflict. The third is having a daily routine, so not staying up all night. What I've been hearing from a number of my college student patients is that because their classes are asynchronous, they don't have to show up at the time of the lecture. They can take the lecture. Well, I always say to them, are you okay with keeping an asynchronous schedule and still having a normal sleep-wake cycle? Or if not, then either you got to take synchronous classes or you have to act as if you're on a synchronous schedule, because sleep-wake cycle is probably one of the most important things that have been disrupted. Exercise, eating habits, sleep-wake cycle, fundamentals of health are getting disrupted. Now, if the anxiety, I'll tell you a quick story. A young woman I treat called me in a complete panic last week. She went back to school 2 weeks ago, and she started realizing, oh my God, campus is not like I expected. We can't hang out together. I have to stay with just my roommates. When we go to eat in the dining hall, we can't even stay there, and we certainly can't mingle, and the gym is limited, and she said, this is terrible. I really don't like this place. I don't really want to be here right now, but I don't feel I can go home. So we had to go through a whole long process of deciding how to help her through this anxiety. And by the way, she was in the clinically anxious range before she called me, but by the time she called me, she was in a panic state. And I would say that if your family is in that level of distress, it's important to get a consultation from a mental health professional, because after a while nobody can think rationally when you're in that state. And so the goal of what we do in the mental health profession is try to give people a place to kind of regain their rationality and to challenge these distorted beliefs that, oh, I'm never going to be able to have a decent future, the pandemic's ruined my life, etc.
we can no doubt learn you all night long. I want to be respectful of your time and everybody else's time. But before I hand it back to Elise, I have 30 seconds by my count. I'm going to ask you 2 questions combined, and maybe you have something off the top of your head. People are really interested in this internet, social media stuff. It's very challenging, it sounds like. Big topic. One question was, are there just 3 takeaways on guiding principles? And then another quick question on the same topic was, do you have any additional resources to recommend regarding teaching self-restraint with devices?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, there's a great little book one of my patients brought me. It's called How to Break Up with Your Cell Phone. It's like, how do you break up with this thing that you're addicted to? Like recognizing the problem that you are not in control. And I always say to everybody I talk to about this is, are you the master of your device, or is the device your master? And if you're not sure, then you need to come up with some solutions. Secondly, there are now I would go to Common Sense Media, and that's a really great resource for parents to talk about the use of media. There are lots of guides and tips in there. So go to Common Sense Media. And then the third thing I'd say is learn as much as you can about how these devices are constructed to actually addict us. And like I recommend things like The Social Dilemma, which is an amazing documentary, because what's happened is it's not just the device, it's the content, it's the way things like Facebook and the likes are all designed to keep us stuck in there and to not be able to leave it. Like FOMO is a real thing, fear of missing out. Know what FOMO is. Identify the FOMO you have. Like, I know that I have FOMO about my email, right? So I've started to learn, like, I'm telling people, I'm not going to, and I'm telling myself, I'm not going to check my email every half hour or every 20 minutes. I'm going to do it, chunk it. So by doing that, I don't let the interruptions of my own mind or the notifications. And the last thing I'll say is turn off, and this you can hear in Social Dilemma by the people who ran Facebook and Google, who don't let their kids even get these devices. You know what they all say? Turn the damn phone off. And with that, I'll say, yeah, turn off the screen when it's when you need to, and have some screen-free life. And that, you know, that way you begin to calm down. And when you go back, I think the technique of mindfulness while you're on the screen is really whoever comes up with the best strategies for that, get in touch with me, because I'll pass it on to my patients. It's an ongoing. I always ask people, how do you learn to do this? Because it's certainly, I'm a digital immigrant, and it's really the natives who have to tell us what they're figuring out if they're interested. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them think there's nothing wrong with spending every other minute scrolling or taking a selfie every other minute you're in the world. And I can't change that habit if they don't think it's a problem. So the first thing is acknowledging it's a problem. And it's like any other addiction. I need help. I need help.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rostain. I'm slightly disappointed that we only had an hour of your time, because I think that there's so much more that you could teach us all.
Maybe down in the road, in some future discussion, we can talk about internet and digital media and strategies for that, because it's become a passion of mine.
Well, this webinar is recorded, so we have that on recording that we will come back to you. So clearly tonight, to our participants, Dr. Rostain, thank you so much for your time on behalf of all of the participants that are here tonight. And for everyone that is here that is new to Camp Launcher, so you've heard Dr. Rostain talk about the importance of camp, and obviously we at Camp Launcher endorse that view wholeheartedly. For some of us, it's become our life's work, and then for some of us, we experienced it in our personal lives and therefore found no other calling but for it to become our life's work. So as you know, there are many people that could benefit from the camp experience, from experiential learning, and they just don't have the opportunity to. And I'll just say it very candidly, the camp can be expensive. And that's why we're here. So if you or anyone you know thinks that we could help you attend camp, please let us know. Camplauncher.org is a great opportunity for you to just explore a little bit more about who we are and who we support. And similarly, if you feel like you're able to help us support these campers, we would also really be happy to talk to you. Welcome to the Camp Launcher community, and welcome to the opportunities that we hope to make available for you as we get more webinars out there. We're eagerly looking to partner with all of you, with your kids, with your teens, with your young adults, with your providers, and with the camp world, and we're hoping to be a bridge that can bring all of these places together. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us directly, and of course visit the Camp Launcher webinar. And this recording of this will be available for you in email as well. We look forward to following up. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.